Hey, what is up, you guys? This is Kylie King, and I'm going to need you to do me a big favor. You ready? Go check out the 3 Count podcast. They have awesome guests on all the time, including myself. Go check it out.
Welcome everybody to another great edition of the 3 Count podcast presents Now Entering the Ring. I'm your host, Clifford Red Dog Miller. That's right, the man that leads you up this mountain called wrestling. You could call me your Sherpa. You should call me your Sherpa. But like every good Sherpa, you got to have someone who's been there, done that, and can do it more efficiently than you can. And that's why it's never about me, but it's about who's entering the ring. And today, you can catch this person on Christmas Cosmic. You catch her on CCW, catch her on AEW, catch her on Ladies Night, IPW, MPW, NWA Empower. And you can also catch her at WAW. She is the queen of crazy. Give it up for Kylie King.
What's up? That was a nice introduction you just gave me. Holy cow.
I definitely have a lot of fun like going through and researching and then just like throwing it all together and then just seeing how it works out.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So number one, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
And then
anytime.
Oh, I appreciate it too. It's fun because like we met at CCW/1CW, and the second time we ran into each other, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna be bold this time. I'm just gonna be like, hey, want to come on the podcast? Because
that's what you got to do in wrestling. You got to be bold, and you just got to straight up. You can't tiptoe around things. You just got to go up and ask the hard questions.
Yeah, and sometimes
and now look at, we're here. Now we're on the podcast. We're talking finally. So it worked out, man. It worked out.
It really did. You know what's it's crazy though, because like the one thing I've been telling people is it's very hard to like go and approach female talent to bring them on the show, right? Because you can only imagine like female talent wise, like y'all get hit with a bunch of like people just blowing up your DMs. And that's like the one thing is like I want to meet people like in person and talk to them about, have a conversation, because then at least you know like, well, he's not a creep like every other person that comes to the damn DM.
Yeah, no, very professional.
And then and when I tell people, and what's cool about this show too is that like it's not only that like it's just some random person that's like, I got a podcast. No, it's someone that legitimately shares a ring with you too. So it's not like it's cool. But first question I'm going to ask you, right? And our fans are going to want to know too, is who's Kylie King?
I'm a crazy, weird, quirky, tall, pale chick from Ohio. Yeah, no, I'm just a normal person. Grew up in Ohio with 5 brothers who were the reason I got into wrestling, and we never got along growing up, but whenever wrestling was on, we'd all sit still and enjoy the program and then beat each other up as soon as it was done. So that's pretty much what I grew up on, and so that's why you see me where I am today. It's not a lot. I mean, I could go into more detail, but that's pretty much the sum of Kylie King. Just a crazy, tall, weird, quirky, pale girl.
It's cool though, because like it's always like the family member that like always brings you in. I've talked to people who've had like uncles bring them in, or like myself, my aunt was the reason why I got into wrestling. And it's always fun to like listen to people's stories about like how they got into the sport, and then like what really was their driving factor. So I'm very curious with it as well. As like, now that what got you in, right? Obviously we know that your brothers were part of the reason I got you in, but what keeps you going in the sport?
So I wanted to be a wrestler since I was a little kid, but my mom and dad weren't crazy about it because their introduction to wrestling was Attitude Era. So especially for women's wrestling, like my mom's idea of wrestling was women coming out in bikinis and just getting them torn off, pretty much. So I kind of held off for a really long time, and then around like my 6th year into college, I just remember like I was still watching wrestling. I was still daydreaming about doing it. And then I was in the middle of a lecture one day, and I just had so much anxiety about the idea of not becoming a professional wrestler. Like the thought that wrestling was going on and I wasn't involved in it just made me like so sad. So I finally just took the dive, worked multiple jobs, saved up, moved to Florida, started my wrestling journey. And that's pretty much what keeps me driven, is the fact that like I waited until I was at a point in my life where it was like, yeah, this is the end all do all kind of thing. Like there was no, I was no longer in that phase of like, oh, let me try this and see if this works out. Never mind, I'm gonna go do this instead. Like by the time I got to wrestling, it was like all the other options had already been explored, and this is what I knew was meant for me. So even on the tiring days and the sluggish days and the days where we're not sure if we're all mentally there, I just remember that fact that, like no matter what I pursued in life, everything led myself back to wrestling. And so that's what was meant to be for me.
That's like that's awesome, because like when I get to hear people share their stories, it makes me like just remember like how lucky like I am, because like I feel like, and I've talked to other people about this too in the same way, is that wrestling like it's always a passion thing, right? And like you always find it around you, right? And so something for me was that wrestling, I when I was a kid, like it was around, I grew up in the attitude era, I grew up in the, with the aggression era as well. But like
Yeah.
everything kept moving in a direction that was like trying to lead me into wrestling, even like amateur wrestling, into college, the military, and then
Yeah.
graduating as well from college. And like always wrestling was around. And finally I was like, I've done everything that people have asked me to do, and I've never actually kind of taken my own leap of faith. I was like, I'm gonna go become a pro wrestler, and like I just went for it. And it's
Yes.
funny to hear you too. Like you took the leap of faith, and that's what I ended up doing too. Was finally taking a leap of faith, and I was like, I'm gonna make this work. I was like, I don't know how,
Yeah.
I don't know where, I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm just gonna go for it though.
That's literally like my whole life though. It was like there was a lot of things I was interested in, but a lot of the decisions I made was mainly to make other people happy. And I just remember like the moment I decided, like, no, I'm going to make a decision for myself. It might not be the popular decision, but it's the best decision for me. As soon as I made that decision, despite how unhappy people in my life were about it, just because, like there were certain expectations and now I was cutting that off. As soon as I made that decision for me, things started to fall into place. Like the work still had to be done, don't get me wrong, but suddenly my drive to work multiple jobs was there, which, if you knew me back before wrestling, I wasn't a lazy person, but I procrastinated a lot. So as soon as I made a decision, like suddenly I become a harder worker than I've ever been my entire life. Being able to move to Florida became possible. I found a school within less than a month of moving to Florida. Like all these things just kept falling into place. And it was a very big like sign from the universe saying like, hey, thank you for finally making the right decision. We've been waiting for a while. So I can completely relate to that. Yeah. It's like sometimes, especially when you're younger, you feel like you have to please everybody. But you have to wait until a certain point where you realize like, hey, life isn't going to be very gratifying or fulfilling until I make a decision for me, because at the end of the day, like it's our path, our journey. We're the ones that have to be happy with what we do with our lives and with ourselves. And that's pretty much where I came to. It was just like I was doing and living a life to make other people happy. And it crept up on me that I wasn't happy because I wasn't doing the one thing that I constantly thought about, which was wrestling.
I think that's where, and it's wild too, because like we're having a discussion, and I brought it up to my mom was talking to me, and she was asking, like, because my daughter, right, who you got to meet before the show. Sorry guys, you guys
Yes.
didn't see the time. But she's like 5'1", 5'2", right? And
Oh wow.
she's growing like ridiculously fast. And so my mom asked me, she's like, is she gonna be a basketball player? I was like, my daughter doesn't have the coordination for basketball. But I was like, she's either gonna be really good at dance or she's gonna be a pro wrestler. And my mom said the same thing that your mom was like talking about, like, oh, she's gonna be one of those. She's like, are you sure you want her to do that? I was like, Mom, if you've seen the wrestlers now versus what the women were like in the late 80s, early 90s, and even some into the late 90s, it's like you'll understand like how much the show, that the sport has evolved for women's wrestling.
It's evolved, it's changed, and it's become an actual sport. We're storytellers, we're athletes. It's not anywhere what it used to be. And it's continuing to evolve too. There's still a lot of work to be done, and it's constantly changing.
It is. And the thing though is like it's cool because like the curve, right? Originally, like if you're a fan of the 90s, y'all will understand what we're talking about. But the curve was like massive, right? But then like
Yeah.
it seemed like women's wrestling was like here, and it just boom, just exploded. And in the last like 5-6 years, and I'm curious if you know like how you feel like your impact has helped, you know, push the sport up as well. But like in the last 5 years, like, and I guess it's been maybe like 6 years, right? Like AJ Lee drops his pipe bomb, right? Everybody's talking about Total Divas, and she's talking about how
Oh,
she's
you
like,
froze again.
oh, did I? I'll give it a second. All right.
Oh no. Okay. You froze for a second, so I couldn't hear or see anything.
Oh.
The last thing I heard was AJ Lee. That was the
Okay.
last thing I heard.
Yeah. So all right. So AJ Lee drops the pipe bomb, right? And
Yes.
she talks about the divas versus like women wrestlers, and then you start seeing people like Paige, and obviously the four horsewomen come up through like NXT, and they start debuting. Natty is still there; she's holding it down. But then like this massive influx of like women just like taken to the sport, and I'm just curious, like for you, right? How do you feel like your impact has helped push the sport up?
Oh, I don't know if I'm at the place in my career yet where I've made that much of an impact. If I have, that's a huge blessing. My goal has always been, you know, and you see it a lot in my promos and in my in-ring work. Like for me, like I just love wrestling. Like I love, because I grew up in a very male dominated household, so I didn't have a lot of female influences around me, like helping me understand, you know, the whole idea of women supporting women. So that concept became a really big part of my life when I got into professional wrestling. And so that's always kind of the attitude and the aura that I try to portray in the ring, is like I just want to show the world what we can do. You know, I know how hard I work. I know how hard you probably work. So when we get out there, let's turn their heads and make them pay attention. That's always been my end game when I get in the ring. Sometimes it gets a little personal. Sometimes you can't avoid it. Some people get a little hot or mean, or but that's always my influence. So I hope that if I have any kind of impact on women in the world or women in professional wrestling, that we just support each other more, elevate each other more, make women's wrestling an even bigger, more respected thing in this world. You know, that's the impact that I hope to leave. And like I said, I don't know if I'm anywhere in my career where I've done that yet. Honestly, like it's been the last couple of years has been that kind of, I've just been kind of keeping my head down and just trying to do the work and see where I go, kind of thing. So I think I really have reflected on all the things I've done in the last couple of years. So maybe, I don't know, but that's what I'm going for essentially.
It's crazy too, right? Because like I watched my daughter, like just her wrestlers have changed, right? So I remember when I first really got her involved into it, just to see what she liked, like Bailey and Sasha Banks and Charlotte and Becky and who else? Asuka was in there. Kairi Sane was also mentioned in there. And then like randomly, like I watched other wrestlers like get into her top 5, right? So people like Gabby Ortiz, right, who's up in
Yeah.
and then well, it's not basic Becca anymore. I know, I'm sorry, Becca, but Becca becomes her top wrestler, right? And it's because like she's interviewed her, she's been in touch with her, and I know like she's talked about like Thunder Rosa, and she talks to me about like Maddie Rinkowski, you know. So she's talking about all these other women on the independent scene. And I'm like, that's how I know like the women are like impacting like the younger generation, because my daughter's here having a conversation with me about wrestlers that she saw on AEW or AEW Dark, which by the way, thank you for that, sir. And thank you for that, ma'am, for being on that show. But
of course.
but to watch the women go through and just dominate the show, it's awesome.
It's becoming, well, it's we're lucky enough that we're in an era right now where there's a lot more opportunity. It's not just WWE anymore. Like you said, we have AEW. There's a lot of independent companies that are coming up, and they are encapsulating a formula that is very infectious for wrestling fans. Like you have Game Changer. They are coming up with stuff where it's like it's a main roster, and then they slowly start circulating newer faces so you can become more aware of people who are busting their butts on the independents. And then of course there's a lot more female promotions coming up out of the workbooks. Of course, Mission Pro I work there very regularly. And there's a lot more freedom for us in our wrestling now too. I feel like a lot of people are not trying to control, because there's been a couple times where I've experienced where it's like I go to a show, there's only one women's match on the card, and then not only do they give us like, I don't know, 5 to 7 minutes, but then they try to tell us what they want us to be or do in the ring. And I feel like there's a lot less of that now. When I go to promotions, they just say, they're like, oh, be you, do this, blah, blah, blah. Like, we want to give you creative freedom. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in that, because when you give wrestlers creative, especially female wrestlers, creative freedom, you're probably going to get a lot more out of it, as opposed to like, oh, just go out there and be a chicken wrestling kind of thing. So I think too, like it really helps that we have a lot more opportunities and a lot more leeway now than we used to. Because I know I for sure, like if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't have discovered the mother effing king and become the kind of wrestler I am right now. Because there was a short period of time where I just thought I had to wear a bra and look cute and stuff like that. And now it's more about the fight and the story and all of that. And I wouldn't have found that myself if I hadn't been given those liberties and that freedom and those opportunities to let that grow.
And yeah, it's cool. It's cool because like once you like getting into like the character side of things and get to like connect with that person instead of having someone tell you, because like for the longest time I thought I was just, your trainer gave you your character, that's who you are, that's who you have to be, and you just do what they tell you. And I believed that for so long, and I have no idea why. I just think that's just the way it just went through. But once I learned that like I can just be whoever I want to be, I was like, I'm never gonna do that. It could be a little bit more insane. So it's cool to see like, and then like you said, like you connect with it, and then the audience connects with it, and then you get like, you just get overhyped with what you're doing, and there's a beauty to it. So I definitely love watching all the different characters, right, that I get to talk with, right, whether it's a Kylie King or maybe a Christy James or maybe a Max the Impaler, which never okay, let me full disclose.
See, that's a very different character.
let me full disclose this. Never in the history of me like just coming along, right, would I have thought that I would have shared the same locker room as yourself and as Max the Impaler, and then get to talk to both people and just like have these conversations that are like, oh damn, like I know who you are. And it's like you get these cool little like these little fan moments, right? But then of course like then you have to remember like, oh yeah, by the way, like I forgot, like I'm supposed to be professional too.
Oh, I do that all the time. Like I remember there'll be times where I'll be backstage at AEW, and there was one time where I was just hanging out with Jerry Lynn, and we were just talking about our exercise routines, and like he was telling me about all the crazy exercise routines he used to do when he was younger to stay in shape for the ring. And it was a completely normal conversation. And halfway through it, internally in my head, I'm sitting there going, I'm having a conversation about workout routines with Jerry Lynn. This is trippy right now. Like I didn't want him to know that I was internally marking out, but I'm just sitting there. I'm like, why am I acting like this is so normal right now? This is not normal. This is really freaking cool. So I completely understand. I've been there many, many times.
Like I totally, like on the outside, you're just like
yes, my composure was great, but internally I was just like, who does this? This is crazy.
Do you know who you are? I remember like I was backstage, right, and one of my friends, his name's Ron, he there was Sandman and Shane Douglas was in the back, and like I'm the new guy. I don't want to say anything. All my friends are like really good friends with him. They're like, hey, what's up? Like come talk to, and I was like, I don't have anything to say. I'm just gonna stand here. And so my buddy Ron goes, all right, buddy, tell him what your name is. And I was like, I'm Red Dog. And he's like, why? And I was like, because my first name's Clifford. And then Sandman just goes, oh my God, are you serious? And I was like, I'm legitimately not having a conversation with Sandman. I never thought this was going to be something that happened in my life.
I met Sandman when I was still in training. His son came to the school that I was at the time. He's intense, man. He's intense. he would sit in there by the ring, like in the middle of our matches, and like just stand there like he was a manager or something, like yelling notes at us while we're having our match. I'm just like, I'm trying to run a spot, but yes sir. Just like, he's intense.
So speaking about being in the matches, right? I'm just curious, like, what's been one of the worst bumps you've taken?
Probably a backdrop, but it wasn't necessarily the bump's fault. I was already hurt, and I had just come back. Like I had injured my neck, and I had lost, like, it was one of those, I went to go duck a clothesline, got the top of my head nicked because I didn't duck enough, and like kinked my neck, tried to keep training on it, made it worse, ended up being out for like 2 months. And then I came back, and the week that I came back, they just happened to be reteaching everybody backdrop, because everybody at the time was like, oh, I don't want to take a backdrop. So I had to run it. And because it was one of the first few bumps I had taken since I got back, like I kind of like chickened out a little bit. And so I didn't fully push myself up and rotate. So I ended up landing sideways instead of flat. And I re-landed on the bad side that I had just healed up. So I was like, I just remember laying there and I felt my arm jingling, and I got so nervous. I was like, oh no, I re-injured it. I was so scared. I think that was probably one of the worst bumps I ever took. Neck, sometimes those neck bumps, like sometimes when I throw my missile drop kick off the second, those neck bumps really suck. You're not supposed to land on your neck, but sometimes depending on how far up I get to avoid killing the person I'm giving the drop kick to, I lean back too far, and then it just ends up not ending well.
I can
yeah, that's probably it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll kind of shift away from like the worst bump that you've taken, but let's talk about like.
I know you see me rubbing my neck right now. I'm like,
right.
I'm like,
yeah, I'm still feeling it.
I can feel it from like 3 years ago.
So I'm curious then, you know, who or when have you been hit? What's the hardest you've been hit?
Like who's like who?
Sure.
Or
you don't have to throw a name if you don't want to. You can talk about the event or something, but if you want to throw a name out there, we won't stop you.
See, I don't mind when people lay their stuff in, so I don't really, I'm not one of those people that when I get backstage from a match, I'm like, man, they really laid that in. Like for me, it's like half the time I don't even feel it until like 2 days later. I'm trying to think. You know what? Not necessarily hit. The person who chopped me the hardest was Rio Mizunami. When her and I remember when her and I were calling that match, because she does her spot in the corner, the fast chops. Give you that last big one. I've never complained about chops. I love chops. I give them really hard. I expect the same thing back. But so I thought it was very odd when we called the spot and she went, "You're okay with that, right?" I hit really hard. And I went like, yeah. I was like, I love chops. I was like, lay it in. My chest was so bruised. Because, I mean, it also didn't help that we called. So we had her spot in the match, which was her normal go-to chop spot.
Yeah.
Then we had like a challenge chop spot where like she exposed herself for me. She's like, all right, give it back to me now. And then I did the same for her. And I remember like in the moment, because when we called the match, I'm like, oh, this is great. This is so aggressive. This is going to be fantastic. And then when we got to the part where it's my turn to open up my chest for her and let her chop me again, I just remember I was sitting there. I'm like, oh, why did we call 2 chop spots? My chest is already so pounded. Like it was so bad. And so I remember I got backstage because my gear covers my chest. You can't really see it.
Right.
So I got backstage, I'm undoing my gear, I take it off, and my whole chest is just bruised from left to right. And she's just like, oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, you told me it was coming. I'm fine. But I just remember, because usually like when people lay their chops in, stings for a second, cool, whatever, keep moving on. But I just remember like that, the pain, the after pain of all that stayed for quite a while. Like that was one of the first times somebody chopped me and I was very aware of it. It was like, oh my gosh. So, but it was, like I said, I love stuff like that. Like I love Joshi wrestling. I love laying stuff in. So it wasn't that I minded it. It's just like, she wasn't kidding. They hurt. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh. So that, I guess that would probably have to be like the hardest strike I've ever taken from an opponent before.
It is weird that we're wired differently, where the point is like, yeah, no, we want you to hit us. And if you hit us, if you don't, like, you get offended that you get, like, if someone misses you, like, I remember like talking to one of my friends, I was like, I would rather have you kick me like dead in the cheek than whiff through. And if you whiff through, I was like, I promise I'll be more mad at you afterwards.
I mean, I know everybody is trained differently. I've had some opponents where like they throw their stuff and it's air, like between the hair and everything, like right. Like it's all good. Nobody can see it. But for me, before, I mean, it partly has to do with what I used to do before wrestling, because I did martial arts for like 6 years, and the style that I trained in, it was called Kwamukan Karate, and we did traditional sparring. And then we did judo, jitsu, and kabuto, which is weapons training. So like we were taught how to do it for real on the streets, but we were also taught how to do it for competition. So like, like contact sparring. So right. Even whether I was training it for like real self-defense or just competition, we always laid it in a little bit. And then when I transitioned into wrestling, you have to keep in mind who my trainers were. I had Billy Gunn, Bubba, Devon, those boys lay their stuff in. So any females that came through their school, we were taught the same. Lay it in. Like, if they can't take it, well, tough luck. They're gonna have to learn how to take it. So like that's just how we were trained. But yeah, I have met people. I think it just depends on where you come from, who your trainer is, because some people are trained differently. But for me personally, if you're gonna get in the ring with me, I want to feel your techniques on me, because I don't know, I just like it better. I feel like it's more natural. I sell better, like all the above. Like that's just how I prefer it. Oh, I've been in the middle of matches, like in the middle of strike offs, and I'll let them get that first punch in, and then the words that come out of my mouth as I'm coming back to throw my punch, I'm like, hit me harder, boom. So that's just my preference.
I got a friend. He's actually the co-host for our debate show that we do. His name's Chaz. You guys know. Anyway, so Chaz and I, whenever we want to turn up the intensity, actually, I shouldn't say we. I'm always like, whatever. We're in the middle of this match. We're gonna do what we gotta do. But whenever he wants to turn up the intensity, I kid you not, he just looks at me in the face and he just dog slaps me, boom, as hard as he can, and I'm like, all right, it's time. And then you go to war. But it is weird, but it's also a lot of fun to, like, when you get that chemistry with somebody and you're just like, nope, we can destroy each other tonight and tomorrow we'll feel it and we'll talk about it. So it'll be fun. Yeah. So curious though, like after a match, like, and after an event, do you have like that post-match meal that you gotta have?
It depends on where I'm at. If I'm in like the Carolinas or like the Georgia area, I always go to Cookout. That place is actually, we were just talking about this earlier, because I'm going to be driving to Georgia in a couple weeks. And that was like my first thought. I was like, we have to stop at Cookout. It's pretty much a fast food place, but it's so good. Usually my go-to after a show though is a burger. Because I feel like it's, no matter where you go in the world, it's really hard to mess up a burger. So whenever we go to a restaurant, usually a burger, and then occasionally pizza. because like I'm pretty good about eating during the week. So like my rule is whatever my last show is, I can eat whatever I want for the next 24 hours. And then I have to go back to it. So, I don't know. I think it just depends on where we're at, but usually a burger is my go-to.
Okay. All right, then one question I really do want to ask and just see like where this goes. What's been one of the hardest lessons you've had to learn?
Oh,
No, we back.
it froze again. Yeah, we're back. There we go.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
I don't know
it's
what
my
happened.
internet. It's my internet connection here. It's wild.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
All right. So one of my favorite questions to ask too is, what's been one of the hardest lessons you've had to learn being in the sport?
I mean, sacrifice, honestly. I can't tell you how many things I've given up for wrestling. I've probably seen my family twice in the last 6 years. There was a period, I always joke that, when I get to a point in my life where people are asking me to write a book, I'm going to write a book called The Dollar Tree Diet. Because when I first got into wrestling, almost every penny I had went into moving to Florida, going to wrestling school. And there was a good 2-year period where I refused to work full time because I wanted to stay committed to wrestling. And when you work full time, it's very hard to do that. Because wrestling is very demanding. Even before you start doing shows and stuff like that, you have to be training. Like our training regimen was, we had to be there at least like 4 days a week. And when we were there from anywhere from noon to about 9 o'clock at night. Wow. So yeah, so there was a long period of time where I had to understand, like, okay, if I'm going to work this much to make this much money, this means I have to live this way. So there was a long period of time where I did nothing for myself. All my money went to groceries and bills and wrestling. And I was lucky if I had 50 cents in my bank account before payday. So the biggest lesson I probably learned is just what true sacrifice means to achieve what you want. Now, thankfully, I'm in a little bit more of a comfortable situation, but there was a very long period of time, because even when I first started doing shows and was making a little bit more money, the way my schedule would work is I would work. So for the longest time, I couldn't hold a job because of wrestling. And then finally I did get a full-time job that was willing to work with me on my schedule. So it ended up being, I would work overnights at the Orlando airport from about 9 at night to like 7 in the morning. I would do that Sunday through Friday. Friday morning, I'd get off, hop in some stranger's car, drive all weekend to shows, get out of the car Sunday evening, take a quick shower, go right back to work. And I would do that every single week. So I would get off work, I'd go to the gym, go home, sleep for like an hour or two, go do some tape studying. If I had somewhere that I could go train there, and then go right to work. Like I really didn't have like a personal life or a lot of extracurricular things that I did. It was just wrestling 24/7. And like I said, there was little money to my name. I very rarely saw my family. Like once you throw yourself into that and you fully commit, there's a lot of sacrifices to be made. And that was probably the biggest thing, the hardest thing that I ever had to do, because I come from a very big family, and I have one of those kind of families that whether it's somebody's birthday or it's Easter, it didn't matter what holiday it was. Even the Super Bowl, we always had a big get together. Right. And we'd always make time to come see each other. So when I went from having that kind of family life to being off of my own in a state completely alone, that was a very big life changing experience. So
I can relate. I can relate a lot. Yeah. It's like I was a military brat, so my dad was in the service, and so we moved around a lot. But then like when I joined the military, like I went from living in Nebraska to living in Texas to living in Hawaii, and then moving to Massachusetts, down to Georgia, up to Maryland, and then I moved around a lot. But the end thing was like I live in Maryland now, and it's just my wife, me, and my daughter. And so like when I get to take off and go to shows, like I book everything, but I have like this awesome person next to me who's like, I got this and I'll take care of this. You just you go take care of that. And I'm like, awesome. And then
Yeah.
we split. But yeah. And like I totally understand, like you're on your own. Like there's nobody else.
Yeah.
Like my friends ask me all the time, they're like, well, don't you have a babysitter? I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah, we don't have those things because our schedules are so sporadic and unnatural. So yeah.
Yes.
Thankfully now I'm at a point in my life where, you know, I have my boyfriend Trevor and his family, and they're all very supportive. I have a much better support system than I used to. Before it was just me and my brothers. And like I said, we were lucky if we had this much money before payday, but the hard work paid off, and now it takes a while, but when you finally get there, it's definitely worth it.
That I love it. So I know you've been in a lot of different locker rooms. This is my last heavy hitting question before we get into the second best segment of the 3 Count podcast. But
Okay.
I just need one do and one don't of the locker room.
One do. I would say probably the don't is don't be an asshole. I mean, I always appreciate locker rooms where everybody's just comes there to have a good time, put on a good show. It's not an ego thing. We all love wrestling and we want to put on a great show. There's nothing worse than when you get to a show and you walk in and there's that dude who's like, oh yeah, I'm the star, blah, blah, blah. And then they make it very clear and they're just a little bit too much. You know, we're all working, we're all going through the same journey and putting on this, you know, making the same sacrifices and going through the same grind. So it's like, we're all in the same playing field here. Don't act like you're some big thing.
Right.
So maybe avoid that. I say of wrestling. I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me this question before, so I'm like, what's the politically correct answer? I don't know. I say wrestling do is just, you know, keep your ears open, just learn. I can't tell you how many times like I've been in a locker room or just been calling a match with somebody who I've never worked before and just trying to not necessarily like take control, but just figure out what needs to be done for that day. You know, sometimes I think I've seen it happen where people like, no, I always have to do this in my matches. I always have to be like this. Matches are always going to be different depending on who you're working, what show you're working for, what opponent you have. Like, you know, just be open and willing, and definitely just I'm at a loss for words right now. It's too, I'm old. It's so late at night. I can't think. I always try to come in with ideas for matches, but then I'm also very receptive when, you know, things change. You know, because not everybody's going to have the same ideas that you have. And so that's okay, because sometimes you get an even better match than you probably had in your head. This is an obvious answer. Another do is, especially if you're new to wrestling, help out. Don't just show up and just sit around and do nothing. Help out, help with setting up, help with the ring, ask for promoters, anybody backstage, like, hey, is there anything you need from me? You know, sometimes shows run super smooth, and then sometimes the card changes very dramatically at the last second. Be open and willing to that. Don't throw a fit or be upset about it, because there's a reason why posters always say cards subject to change. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's a good answer. I don't know.
No, I love them both. I love them because what we've learned now is don't be an asshole, be flexible, and always help.
Yes.
That's
flexible. I said so many things when I could have just said flexible. All right, I'm gonna save that in my word pocket for next time. Wow.
All right.
Oh, boy.
Well, that is our heavy hitting questions. But we gotta get into the second best segment of the 3 Count podcast, and that is the 10 count questions. And this is how it works, Kylen. I'm gonna fire off 10 questions at you rapid fast. Whatever's your answer, that's your answer.
All right. I'm sorry ahead of time, guys.
So we're gonna put on an imaginary timer for added pressure.
All right.
And here we go. Hearts or spades?
Hearts.
Favorite movie?
Mummy.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
Favorite color?
Purple.
Sonic or Mario?
Mario. I love Sonic. That's why I had to answer like that. Ugh, but Mario, yeah.
Favorite type of lift?
Lakes.
Okay. Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
Favorite podcast?
Yeah. That's a trick question. Come on.
It's a great question. You know what? Let's be honest, okay? People all the time will be like, "Well, I like the Joe Rogan Experience, or I like the Cornette Report," or like, I'm like, "Awesome, we'll take second place to those."
Yeah, right.
Nominate one person that you want to see on the show.
Let's do Willow, because I just recently wrestled her, and for some reason her name is on the tip of my brain. So Willow.
All right. And then last but not least, my favorite question I ask every single person who comes on this show: favorite curse word?
Fuck. It's just encapsulates everything.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody, I was like, I'm trying to get this trending back again, which I got to send the link out to a couple people who asked me for it. But if you haven't checked out the history of the F word on YouTube, please do. It's like 5 minutes long. It's worth every minute that you get to watch it.
I'm gonna look it up now. I didn't know that there was a history on the F word. That's great.
It was like one of like the first viral videos that came out. And the reason why I'll date myself for this, I was in high school when this came out, and this was like 2002.
Okay. That's fun.
But that is all of our questions we have. So the only thing I have for you is to let our viewers and our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Twitter and Instagram, super easy, at Kylie King. I have a Facebook. I don't use it that much, but you can attempt to try and contact me on there. If you guys are looking for merch, you can find my merch at fullygimmicked.com. I also sell it at my shows. They do have a couple of things on the Fully Gimmick site that I don't sell at my shows. I just like little things like stickers and phone cases and stuff like that. And if you follow me on all my social media accounts, I keep people very much updated about what's going on, shows, signings, all that good stuff. So,
and there you have it. That's where you can find us. So you know what that means. We gotta take us home. So this is the 3 Count Podcast presents Now Enter the Ring. And like I said, I'm your host, Clifford Red Dog Miller, the man that leads you up this mountain called wrestling, which, of course, you should be calling me your Sherpa. But it's never about me. It's about who is entering the ring. And today, you see her right next to me. It is the greatness right there, Kylie King. That's right. So you guys know what to do. Tune into the next episode and be there, or you just wait for this episode to end. You wait for that outro and you choose another episode. Peace.